You walk into a new place and feel the weight of every glance. It's your first day. Maybe it's school, a new company, an unfamiliar city, or simply one of those phases of adult life that forces you to start over from scratch. And in the middle of that emptiness, a question arises. Who am I going to be here? It's not just a matter of adapting, it's almost like a forced reinvention, as if there's a stage, and you have to choose the right costume before even knowing what play you're in. That's when social self-consciousness is born, that uncomfortable feeling of seeing yourself through someone else's eyes. You begin thinking more about what others will perceive than about what you truly feel. You start adjusting your posture, your tone of voice, even the way you laugh. And without realizing it, you begin stitching together a version of yourself that pleases, that protects, that works. Jung called this construction the persona, the social mask we wear to fit in. But the longer that mask stays on your face, the harder it becomes to remember what your reflection looked like before it. Because the fear of being seen often doesn't come from who you are, but from who others expect you to be. And from that moment on, a silent conflict begins to unfold between the need to belong and the desire to be real. The fear of being seen, more often than not, doesn't come from who you are, but from who others expect you to be. And as you try to mold yourself to meet those expectations, you begin to notice that your choices aren't entirely yours. What you like, what you wear, how you speak or behave. Everything starts to feel like it's been predetermined by invisible codes that label you before you even have a chance to introduce yourself. You're read by your face, your voice, your body, your gender, or the background you didn't choose. And suddenly, even in silence, the world has already decided who you are. The world hands you an identity before you've had the chance to build one. And so, in order to survive, you accept it. You start living under the logic of what's expected of you, as if trying to fit into a mold that never really fits, but that you're afraid to let go of. This constant adaptation slowly weakens something essential, the freedom to simply be. And the more you adjust, the further you drift from a genuine sense of authenticity. Little by little, a restlessness creeps in. Why does nothing I do ever feel like enough? Why do I feel out of place, even when I'm accepted? This is where the conflict between ego and persona becomes visible. The ego, as the center of consciousness, seeks consistency, a sense of meaning. The persona, on the other hand, is oriented toward the outside world, toward the social, toward what works. But when the ego is forced to express itself solely through the persona, with no space for the true self, frustration begins to grow. The body is still present, but the spirit begins to retreat. It's as if a part of you is watching from the outside, uncomfortable with the role being played. You keep on living, of course, but further and further from yourself. Even though adaptation is often unavoidable, there comes a point when it stops being a way to connect and becomes an exhausting disguise. The constant effort to be someone who fits in, who pleases, who molds to every new environment, all of this creates a life where, most of the time, you're someone you barely recognize. You start changing faces like you change clothes. One for your family, another for work, one more for your friends. Even when you're alone, it can feel like someone's watching from within, expecting you to keep performing. That feeling of always playing a part comes at a cost. Not just physical, but emotional, deep, and almost invisible. It's the exhaustion of never being whole, of always being split between what you feel and what you show. And the more that gap grows, the more fragile you feel inside. It's as if every mask you put on takes away a piece of your true voice, until silence becomes more comfortable than exposure. In Jung's theory, this is understood as the conflict between the persona, the social face we present to the world, and the shadow, which holds all the repressed, forgotten, or rejected aspects of who we truly are. The persona is necessary, of course. It allows us to function in society, to communicate, to belong. But when it becomes the only language we speak, it starts to deny everything that doesn't fit the chosen role. And the shadow, ignored for too long, begins to surface in unexpected ways, in emotional outbursts, in identity crises, in a nameless melancholy. Being around people and feeling like you can't be authentic creates a silent kind of anguish. You get used to smiling when you want to cry, agreeing when you're unsure, being kind when you're drained. All of that chips away at your spontaneity, eroding your connection to what you really feel. Because being authentic requires courage, but it also requires space. And when every space demands a performance, there's little left of what once felt natural. Life turns into a constant stage, and you into an actor who can never leave it. But what happens when you forget what your original role even was? When the applause from the outside world is no longer enough to quiet the emptiness growing inside. That's when authenticity stops being an ideal and becomes a vital need, a desperate attempt to remember that before any social expectation, there was someone there. Someone real, imperfect, but alive. This division between who you are and what you show, between the inner and the social self, was named with striking precision by W.E.B. Du Bois in his work The Souls of Black Folk as double consciousness. For him, it wasn't just a psychological conflict, but an existential condition lived by those who, throughout their lives, are forced to see themselves through their own eyes, and also through the eyes of those who judge them. It's like always living with two mirrors in front of you, one that shows who you believe you are, and another that reflects what the world projects onto you. This constant split creates a kind of weariness that ordinary words can't describe. You wake up every day trying to find some sense of inner unity, but you feel torn between pleasing, resisting, confronting, or giving in. Before you even realize it, you're living in two different rhythms, the rhythm of your soul and the rhythm of the outside gaze. And the more you try to bring them together, the more you realize that maybe it's never going to happen. Because there are moments when what the world expects from you simply doesn't fit your essence. And trying to fit in at any cost is the quickest path to losing yourself. Jung, in his own way, spoke of this division too, the fragmentation of the psyche. When essential parts of who we are systematically rejected, ignored, or suppressed, the mind begins to break into pieces. You're no longer a whole person, you're a collection of masks, adaptations, hidden wounds, and silenced voices. The desire to be recognized, which is so deeply human, starts to coexist with the fear of being exposed. And the result is a constant feeling of being outside your own body, like your life is being lived by someone else. Someone more restrained, more controlled, more acceptable to others. Living under double consciousness means feeling like a stranger in your own skin. It's laughing with a group while secretly wondering if they're laughing at you. It's staying silent in a conversation out of fear that what you say won't be well received. It's rehearsing your words in your head before you speak, analyzing every gesture, calculating every step. It's a permanent state of alertness, as if the next mistake might be the final one, the one that reveals too much, that shows what should have stayed hidden. But the cruelest part of this condition is that it doesn't fade over time. It becomes more refined. You become a master at hiding what you feel, at performing what others expect. And every compliment you receive, every bit of approval, every "you're amazing" seems to come with a weight. Are they seeing me, or just the character I created to survive? At that point, the search for a true self becomes a quiet urgency. Because to keep living this split means accepting a fragmented existence. And deep down, all a human being truly wants is to feel whole, even if it costs them the world's approval. And if, in the past, this conflict between who we are and what we show was limited to face-to-face interactions, today it has invaded the space where many feel the most comfortable, the digital world. But that sense of comfort is an illusion, because on social media, where everything seems freer, the weight of the other's gaze becomes even more oppressive. Every photo posted, every caption written, every prolonged silence carries a risk of being judged, misunderstood, or worse, ignored. You want to be seen, but you're afraid of being truly seen. You want to express yourself, but you're afraid of disappointing. So, you begin to slowly disappear, even though you're still present. You avoid posting, avoid commenting, avoid standing out. It's as if existing in that space requires erasing too much of yourself. This is the new face of double consciousness, a carefully controlled presence, meticulously edited, not to reveal, but to hide. A profile that looks like you, but doesn't contain you. Digital withdrawal, the growing habit of observing without participating, of consuming without engaging, has become a refuge for those afraid of being seen too much. And at the same time, it's a prison, because by not expressing yourself, by not showing up, you also stop affirming your existence. You're caught between the desire to belong and the fear of exposure. Jung might call this a defense against confronting the unconscious, because revealing yourself, even in a simple, everyday post, means touching something intimate, an emotion, a thought, an opinion, and touching that can be dangerous. It can expose fears, insecurities, traumas that you're not ready to face. Exposure, even when it seems harmless, lays bare the ego's fragility. That's why many choose not to speak, not to appear, not to take the risk. Because silence feels safer than the possibility of rejection. But that silence comes at a price. Little by little, you start to feel invisible. You watch others live, express themselves, grow, and you wonder when exactly you fell behind. The digital world, which once promised connection, turns into yet another stage for mask. And the more you withdraw from it, the harder it feels to return. Because coming back would require courage. And today, courage isn't about grand gestures. It's about daring to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to reshape you. Being seen has never felt so frightening. Because deep down, we're not just afraid of judgment, we're afraid that what we have to show won't be enough. And that wound, old and silent, only grows deeper. As time passes and profiles multiply, an unsettling question starts to emerge. Is there still such a thing as authenticity in this universe where everything is image? Where even the most spontaneous moments feel rehearsed, edited, filtered? You might scroll through your own timeline and ask, who is that person I see there? They look like me, but do they represent me? Do they reflect who I really am? It's a fair question, because being authentic in this setting is almost an act of resistance. Not because you don't know who you are, but because the system around you doesn't allow you to show it without consequence. Being authentic today isn't just an aesthetic choice or a pretty phrase in your bio. It's a lonely, often exhausting decision that requires accepting the risk of being misunderstood, of not pleasing, of standing apart from the invisible norm everyone follows. It means breaking the script. But the problem runs deeper than what we post or don't post. It lives in the question that quietly echoes inside all of us. Are we only what we show? Or is there something more? Something no camera can capture, something even we struggle to fully name? Jung said the self is that totality that lives within us, not just the part we choose to show, but also everything we hide, forget, or have yet to discover. The self is bigger than the ego, bigger than the persona. It doesn't fit in a feed or a caption. And that's exactly why living only on the surface of the image stirs such deep restlessness. When you reduce yourself to only what appears on the surface, something inside you starts screaming for space. Your creative impulse, your intuition, your sensitivity, your unresolved pain, all of it begins to search for ways to exist. But if there's no room to express that honestly, a collapse begins. You sense that something is out of place, but you can't quite tell what it is. And so you try to fix it by buying more, posting more, tweaking more. As if you could fill an existential void with filters and stories. But the void doesn't fall for illusions. It persists. And maybe that's the call so many people are feeling lately. The desire to be more than just an image. To go back to truly feeling things. To write without thinking about algorithms. To laugh without having to record it. To live without turning everything into content. The longing to be whole again, even if it means disappearing from others' view for a while. Because sometimes, to remember who you are, you have to step off the stage. You have to silence the noise of the world to hear what the self is trying to say. And maybe it says, in a soft but steady voice, you are not just what others see. You are so much more than that. But even when you try to pull away, to go quiet, to disappear a little, you still carry the weight of others' gaze inside you. Because that gaze is no longer just external, it has become part of your psychic structure. It's in your head now, judging, correcting, limiting. Du Bois wrote about this with the clarity of someone who lived under the weight of exclusion and expectation. Double consciousness isn't just a perception, it's a prison. A fractured lens between you and the world, distorting everything you see, including yourself. This mechanism of constant self-censorship, of internalized surveillance, generates a kind of suffering that few people can clearly describe. You can be surrounded by others and still feel alone. You can be praised and still feel inadequate. You can be loved and still question whether you deserve it. Because your self-image was built from other people's bricks, expectations, comparisons, judgments. And when you look at yourself, all you see is a collage of opinions that were never yours to begin with. That's when the alienation from yourself becomes unbearable. The disconnection between who you are inside and who you seem to be on the outside creates a crack in the soul. Jung saw this rupture as fertile ground for neurosis, when internal conflict becomes so intense that it spills over into the mind, the body, into life itself. Neurosis, in this sense, isn't just a diagnosis. It's the muffled scream of a soul that was never heard, of a self that never had space to exist. Living under constant watch, under silent pressure to fit in, can turn even the simplest moments into minefields. You hesitate before speaking, think 100 times before sending a message, regret opening up, even if no one said anything. Fear doesn't need words to exist. It just needs that feeling that who you are will always be either too much or not enough. And over time, this tension starts to reshape even your memories. You begin to recall your mistakes more vividly than your successes. You start believing the criticisms more than the compliment. You find yourself, without realizing it, seeking the approval of people who never truly saw you. As if your worth still needed to be validated by something external, unreachable, unattainable. As if living were a constant performance for an invisible audience. But that audience doesn't exist. It was built inside you, fed by years of exposure without support, of experiences without empathy, of gazes that looked but never truly saw. And maybe that's why hiding isn't enough to heal the wound. You have to reconnect with what was lost along the way. Because as long as your image matters more than your truth, the distance between the two will only grow. Living torn between who you are and who you feel you must appear to be doesn't go unnoticed by the body or the mind. Over time, the symptoms begin to show, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming. An anxiety you can't explain, a sadness that appears without warning, a fatigue that no amount of sleep can fix. You start to realize something's wrong, but you don't know where. The routine goes on, the responsibilities are met, but inside, everything is collapsing. This is the result of living in dissonance. A life built on masks demands constant effort, and no one can sustain that forever. You begin to feel like a prisoner of yourself, as if you're struggling to keep standing a fragile structure made entirely of appearances. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to dismantle it without everything falling apart. Jung understood this process as an invitation to transformation. He believed that every psychic crisis carries within it a potential for healing. But to access that, you need courage, the courage to look inward, to face the shadow. That part of us that was rejected, hidden, silenced, but never stopped existing. The shadow is not the evil within us. It is everything that wasn't accepted. And because of that, it carries immense energy that can either destroy or liberate us, depending on how we confront it. Ignoring the shadow is what leads to neurosis, to emotional breakdown, to that accumulated rage that explodes at the wrong times. It's what makes you feel like you're always on the verge of something, a scream, a breakdown, a rupture, because there's a part of you screaming to be seen, to be heard, to exist. And that part, as uncomfortable as it may seem, is essential to your wholeness. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean losing control or becoming someone you're not. It means recognizing that you are more than what you show, that inside you there are fears, impulses, contradictions, and that all of that is part of your humanity. Pretending to be balanced all the time is what makes you sick. Allowing yourself to be real, even if imperfect, is what heals. But that takes rupture. It means letting go of the expectation to always please. It means dealing with the possibility of disappointing, of frustrating, of being misunderstood. Because only then can you stop living for others and start living for real. At this point, authenticity isn't an aesthetic choice. It's a matter of psychic survival. Either you accept yourself, with everything that entails, or you spend your life trying to fit into molds that were never meant for you. And maybe what feels like a collapse is actually the beginning of something new. Because sometimes falling apart is the first step toward rebuilding. Maybe that's why, at some point, the question shifts from, how can I adapt better? To, how long will I keep betraying myself just to be accepted? There comes a moment in life when the discomfort of being fake outweighs the fear of being real. And it's at that moment that a quiet decision presents itself. Keep living behind masks, or take the first step toward your own authenticity. This choice doesn't happen in a grand way. There are no fireworks, no applause. Sometimes it starts with a firm no, or a whispered enough in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's just the silence of someone who decides to stop pleasing, stop conforming, stop apologizing for existing. It's an almost invisible gesture, but within it lies an entire universe, the universe of someone who chose themselves. For Jung, this process is called individuation, the inner movement of becoming who you truly are by integrating all the parts that were denied, forgotten, or distorted. It's not about perfection, but about wholeness. It's not about standing out, but about recognizing yourself. And this path, as lonely as it may seem at first, is the only one that can bring true peace. Because it's no longer peace bought through others' approval, it's peace earned through the alignment between what you feel and how you live. Being authentic today might be the most radical act of all. Because the world revolves around performance, image, content. And choosing to live the truth of your own being is, in a way, stepping off the script. It's refusing to perform. It's saying, I exist like this. Whole, imperfect, but real. There's no manual for it. No guarantee of acceptance, no promise of instant reward. What there is the chance to finally live with lightness. To no longer have to rehearse your words, hide your reactions, deny your impulses. To be able to look at yourself with honesty and not feel shame. To inhabit your own body with presence, with dignity, with truth. You can keep pleasing, fitting in, adapting. Or you can choose authenticity, even with everything it demands. The choice is quiet, but it changes everything. Because once the truth awakens, it doesn't go back to sleep. And living according to it might just be the only way not to lose yourself, even in a world that keeps trying to reshape you.